Welcome to our latest of our Indoor Environment Division Science Series webinar. Today we are honored to welcome two of the technical contributors to the development of IED's updated guidance on air cleaners. Terry Brennan of Camroden Associates and Lew Harriman of Mason Grant Consulting. These are two wonderful experts in the area of indoor air quality, and we are quite pleased to have them join us. I will now turn it over to Erin, who will give you some logistics and details for giving questions.
Thank you, Lorraine, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Please submit any questions or comments for discussion using the question function on the right-hand side of your screen. All questions are submitted to the speakers for discussion scheduled at the end of this webinar during the Q&A session. Additionally, if you have any technical questions or comments, you can use the same feature to submit those inquiries. Terry and Lew, I'm going to hand it over to you, and thank you for being with us today.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. What we put together for you here in this webinar is a summary, a little bit of a guide to part one of the guidance. In 2018, the Environmental Protection Agency Indoor Air Division did a significant amount of research to update the guidance for air cleaners in the home. And this residential guidance really comes in two parts. There's an 8-page guide for consumers, and then there is a 74-page technical summary for those who need more detail. This particular webinar is the first of two. There's going to be another one a month from now on March 21st, also a Thursday, also at the same time. And if you're interested in the technical details of how this guidance came to be and some of the reasons that the consumer guidance says what it does, then we certainly encourage you to come to that webinar as well. So this webinar is going to be focused on the consumer guide. And when I say we, I'm talking about two presenters, myself, Lew Harriman of Mason Grant Consulting in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and then the senior partner, my longtime friend and mentor, Terry Brennan of Camroden Associates. And we have been involved as consultants, serving as consultants to the EPA to assist in the major effort to update this guidance. So we know a little bit about where the guidance came from and why it says what it says. We're not EPA folks, but we have a pretty good idea of the way the guidance is written. So with that in mind, I'm going to shortly turn it over to Terry to give us a brief or a fairly extensive introduction as to why we care about particles and why we think we need to clean them up from the home and from bedrooms. But before I do that, I want to state very clearly that we are both here for you. Not the other way around. You're not here for us. We would very much like to have your questions to enliven the discussion. We probably will take the first 20, 25 minutes or so to go through this material. But as you think of questions, please type them into your web interface or keep track of them if you're on the phone. And we will be very eager to hear those questions and talk with you about your concerns and what issues you have with respect to air cleaning in the home when we move through the rest of the material and when we come to the summary. So with that in mind, let me turn it over to the guy that really knows, Terry Brennan, and he can explain a little bit of why we care about particles and cleaning them up. Terry, up to you.
Thanks, Lew. The main reason that we're interested in particles is that they're an air contaminant, a class of air contaminants, really, for which we have quite a lot of epidemiology that links exposure to particles in outdoor air to health endpoints. The reason we're concerned about particles is that there is a number of premature deaths and sickness that are associated with exposure to particles in the outdoor air. And that's what this map shows us. The red areas are where the highest exposures to the largest number of people are. So how does that relate to indoor exposures? The best study that I've seen on relative indoor exposures that compares different indoor air contaminants and their health impacts is from Lawrence Berkeley Labs. And they examined the health literature for a few dozen indoor air contaminants and then ranked them in terms of the greatest impact on life and illness. And they combined premature death with reduced quality of life in their studies, and the unit that they used is one that had been used in previous studies. The DALY is the daily adjusted life year, which includes the number of premature deaths, number of years premature death, and the number of years in which a person would have health reduced enough that it significantly affected the quality of their life. So it's a combination of those. The important parts on this graph for me are looking at the x-axis. We have the rank-ordered contaminants that turned out to have the greatest impact on DALYs. And on the y-axis, we have the value of the DALYs, the lost equivalent years of life. And notice that the y-axis is a logarithmic scale. So PM 2.5, exposure to PM 2.5 is the highest risk among the pollutants that they studied. And the next highest is an order of magnitude lower than the estimate for the PM 2.5 exposures. So that, for me, that makes it a very important class of contaminants that we can measure gravimetrically or with particle counters, and we are measuring all the contaminants that are particles. Just a few words about exposures to particles in the indoor and outdoor air. The size range that we're interested in mostly. On the right-hand side of your slide, you'll see an artist's conception of the respiratory system, which we're going to just simply break up today into the upper respiratory system, the nasal and upper bronchial tubes, and the tracheal bronchial, which would be the mid-lung, and the alveoli, which would be the deep lung. The graph shows the fraction of the particles by size range that gets deposited in each of these. And the one labeled TB, the dashed line labeled TB, is the thoracic bronchial, deep mid-lung, and the solid line has a peak at around 8 to 10 microns, is deposition of the upper respiratory nasal passages, our primary filter, and the dotted line is the alveolar deposition. And the alveolar deposition is happening where the gas exchange happens between air and the bloodstream, very thin walls. And that's also where the peak is in the 0.02 to 0.05 range. So this is very fine particles that are being deposited down there. That's the reason that we're thinking about the importance of filtering the smaller particles. If you drop down to the next graph down below, you'll see a size distribution for urban traffic, for urban background, and for rural locations of particles in the outdoor air. And what you see is that it's that 0.01 to 0.1 range, which is where most of the particles in outdoor air fall. And those are happen to be the same size range that gets deposited in the deep lung. One of the interesting things that pops out in the epidemiology is that epidemiological studies relate health endpoints to contaminants measured in outdoor air. But it turns out that particles of outdoor air origin, our main exposure occurs indoors because of two things. One is fine particles stay airborne pretty well, and they end up migrating from outdoors into our buildings through cracks and holes or open windows or ventilation systems. And the second thing is we spend 70 to 90% of our time inside. So we are exposed to particles of outdoor origins inside our buildings because that's where we are, and the particles migrate in. In terms of indoor sources, for most of us, the biggest indoor source happens when we eat something or burn something in the building. And for many of us, that has to do with preparing food. You can see on this list of indoor particle sources, there are many activities, gas stove, toaster oven, popcorn popper, that it has to do with cooking. And we have right now an image of shrimp sizzling here, and some particle data from studies done by Lance Wallace showing spikes in ultrafine particles when preparing shrimp scampi, and an even higher spike when the shrimp is reheated at high heat. So these are important sources for us when we prepare our food. And we can do something about cooking, and we can also do something about particles entering from outdoors. If we air seal our buildings and we filter our outdoor air, we can reduce the indoor exposure to particles of outdoor origin. We can reduce the cooking particles exposure by capturing the particles right at the range or the oven and exhausting them out of the building with a range hood and fan so that they are out of your breathing space before they have the chance to mix into the general air in the building. So it's more effective than just bringing in air to dilute the concentration. It's something that works well because you're collecting it right near the source. It's the same principle as when we use bath and exhaust fans. If we can't, if we have already done, or for some reason we can't do the intervene at the source methods of air sealing or local exhaust ventilation, we can also filter particles out of the indoor air by recirculating air through filters in our heating and air conditioning or in portable air cleaners, or by filtering the outdoor ventilation air if you have fan-powered outdoor air in your ventilation system. And I think that brings us to Lew's slide. So, Lew, take it away.
Terrific. Okay, so those are two choices. If you aren't able to control the source by exhausting from the kitchen for whatever reason, and if you're not able to run the bathroom fan for whatever reason, and if you're not able to reduce the amount of particle generation in the home for whatever reason, such as there's just somebody that's gonna burn those candles, and if someone were to be involved in smoking or bring home secondhand tobacco smoke, then that's particle generation that's likely to happen in the home. The least cost way to protect yourself and your family from problems with particles is to not have those particle sources in the home, and that's available to anybody without having to spend money. Now, when you do have to spend money, when you have to say, okay, we got to filter the air because we've got these things and we can't get rid of the particles another way, then there are two choices. We could either use a central system to do that, or we could use a portable air cleaner to do that. The central system is something that, again, if you are in public housing or low-income housing, you don't necessarily have an awful lot of control over what you can or can't do with your central system, but you always do have with the exception of those who are economically disadvantaged, you do have the choice of using a portable air cleaner. Then the question comes up is what sort of a filter should you have in the central system, and what sort of a portable air cleaner would be prudent to invest in if you're going to invest some money. So if we're looking at the furnace filter option, what I've got here for you on this page is a photograph of 3 typical levels of filtration that are available for you in a furnace filter or an air conditioning system filter. And the first one here that shows in green is a non-rated filter. The way filters are rated is 2 or 3 different ways, but the generic way and maybe the most reliable way is the MERV system. The MERV is a system generated by the American Society of Heating, Air Conditioning, and Refrigeration Engineers, and that is the minimum efficiency reporting value, MERV. And there are numbers in that system. Low numbers mean not very much filtration. High numbers means a great deal of filtration. And looking at those photographs, you can see how it is that you move from not very much filtration to a lot of filtration. It has to do with the amount of fabric, the amount of filter paper that's in the filter. And the green filter there on the left is basically a polyester mesh. If you were to put your hand behind that green mesh, you'd be able to see your hand. It's very good for protecting equipment. It keeps hair and feathers and dust bunnies and stuff like that from clogging up your HVAC system, your heating and air conditioning system. It doesn't do much in the way of protecting people, but it does do a great job of protecting the equipment and the system itself from getting lots of particles through it and causing problems for the equipment or residual in the ductwork. The second one there is the point at which you're going to start to get some reasonable filtration. That is a MERV 4 or a MERV 6, roughly, and you see right away that has more filter fabric. Those are pleats in the filter to allow more surface area in the same face area, and then that way you can slow the air down a little bit, and you can put it through paper, which is a better filtration than just a polyester mesh, and you're going to trap more of those particles. But at MERV 4 or MERV 6, you're going to get the larger particles. And as Terry pointed out in the earlier discussion, there's nothing wrong with taking big particles out of the air. That's a good thing to do too, but it doesn't address the small particles. For that, you need something like a MERV 13. And the filter shown on the right-hand side of that photograph with all those little tiny pleats is a MERV 13. And in fact, that might even be better than a MERV 13. So lots of pleats in a filter gives you a higher MERV rating. And if the filter has lots of pleats and it's also deeper than these are 1-inch filters. If you can fit a 2 or a 3 or a 4-inch filter in your system, then you get even better filtration, as long as the filter is sized right for the filter frame. One of the things that you don't want to do with any filter is crush it. And you don't want to use a filter that's too small for the frame, because then air zips around the edges. And basically you don't get any filtration at all, because air is going to take the path of least resistance, and it's going to take all the air and a lot of the particles around the filter instead of going through it. So you want to get a filter that's sized for the system that you have and fits, relatively snugly, but not crushing, into the filter frame. So that's what you want if you want a furnace filter or an AC system filter, is something like a MERV 13. As of the first of the year, for those of you that are in the California area, California requirements beginning the first of next year require MERV 13 in all HVAC systems, in all new HVAC systems. So that will sort of come along without having to think very hard about it in California. Now the question is, how are you going to find a MERV 13 filter? How would you figure out how to get such a beast? Well, if you are spending money and spending that online, all you really need to do at your favorite web-based store is go ahead and type in MERV 13, MERV 13, and you will get a selection of filters, and some of them will be MERV 13. I pulled this one off the web at one popular store, and what it shows you is that for 6 of these guys, it's going to cost about $65. So a little bit more than $10 a piece, $11 a piece for a MERV filter, and that's going to last you probably in the area of 3 months in most houses, maybe less in a house which has a lot of particles, and maybe a lot longer in a house that doesn't have so many. The problem about the MERV system is that there are also 2 proprietary systems that are used to rate filters. If you were to go to one of the popular home improvement stores, you might find something like this. This is a proprietary system owned by the home improvement store, and this is an FPR, which is fine particle rating, and that is an FPR 10. What that means is it's going to get really lots and lots of those fine particles out. It's probably at least a MERV 13, and maybe even better than that. Then there's another system by one of the filter manufacturers, also proprietary, called the Microparticle Performance Rating, the MPR rating. And if you were to look at filters made by that manufacturer, and if you look for a MPR 1900 or maybe a 1700 even, either one of those would give you effectively a MERV 13 or better rating. So those are the 3 things that you want to look for online. A MERV 13 is easy to find at home improvement stores. Either an FPR 10 or an MPR 1900 is going to get you the filter that you'd like to have for filters. You can get better than this, but these are perfectly good choices, and will get a very large proportion of those small particles out using your HVAC system, all dependent, of course, on how many hours your HVAC system is operating. And that brings us to one of the limitations of HVAC systems in general. They run for about, over the course of a year, maybe somewhere between 20 and 30% of the hours in the whole year. So that's one of the limitations of using filters in an HVAC system, is that they just don't run very much. And if the air isn't going through the filter, then of course it's not being filtered. So that brings us to the next alternative, which is portable. So portable filters are an option, both for people that have HVAC systems and for those of you who don't. You can use a portable air cleaner. So if you're going to get a portable air cleaner and go to the home improvement store or electronics store or wherever you like to buy portable filters, you would be confronted with this question as well: which one do I buy? There are lots of them, and many of them have all sorts of magical gizmos too. They have plasma, they have friendly ions, they have smiley faces. So many are marketed as being silent or really silent or very quiet or exceptionally quiet. And the trouble is, all that stuff doesn't help you very much make a decision. But what can help you make a decision is this label. This label is something that is produced by the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers, AHAM, Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers. That's a U.S.-based organization that's formed up by the manufacturers of home appliances in general. And they have a division that deals with home air cleaners, with air filters. And they have a terrific rating system called the CADR. The CADR is Clean Air Delivery Rate. And what that means is that the filter is rated according to how much clean air it provides to the space. And that volume of cleaned air is put on the label. So in this case here, you have a label from the AHAM Verified program. This is a filter that's probably about good for about roughly a room of 450 square feet, provided you keep windows and doors closed and you don't have particles coming in from elsewhere. About 450 square feet. And this filter, apparently, on its highest speed, will give you about 298 cubic feet per minute of air that has been cleaned of tobacco smoke. And tobacco smoke, those are the small particles. There's lots of other kinds of small particles too, from traffic and from all sorts of other sources. But if you look at the rating for tobacco smoke, you know that that's the air that has been cleaned of small particles. So that's 298 cubic feet per minute of air that has been cleaned of that. That same filter is at the same time providing about 291 of those cubic feet are going to be cleaned of all the different sizes of dust. It's a wide variety of particle sizes. And then the big chunky things, the pollen, it's going to provide more air that has been cleaned of the pollen in the air. So basically, it's all one airstream, but the effectiveness of the filter goes down a little bit as you get to the small particles. That's just a way of saying that. What you want to look for, again, is the AHAM verified label. Look for one that is sized appropriately for the space that you'd like to keep clean. Many times, if you're in a larger building or an apartment that has many rooms or a larger one, perhaps you might want to have more than one filter. But then the question is, well, where do you put the one filter if you're going to invest in one filter? Actually, before we get to that, what we'll do is talk a little bit about the utility of these guys outside of just buildings that don't have HVAC systems. What you have here is a picture of one of the cities in Southern California that had a wildfire threat last year. So there are buildings certainly that have central AC systems. They all do in modern houses in California and much of the rest of the country. But when you have a wildfire, you have lots and lots of particles in the air. What you see to the right of that photograph is a graph that comes from the EPA's outdoor air quality data. And if you look along the top, you'll see the months of 2017 for Santa Barbara, California. And you'll see that in January and February, the air was really very good. It's below 12 micrograms. That's what that symbol means, that mu symbol, micrograms per meter cube. So that's pretty terrific air compared to most of the air throughout the U.S. and throughout the world. But then towards the fall, you begin to pick up more particles. Those yellow dots are showing you that the air is 2 or perhaps 3 times the number of fine particles. The PM2.5 particles have now tripled at certain times of the year. But then when you get a wildfire, as they had in December, now you got more than 150 micrograms per meter cube. This is just an awful lot. This is terrible. This is really air that you don't want to have. Well, your HVAC filter may or may not be able to handle that kind of load, but if you have a portable, you can put this in a bedroom or some other place where you have sort of a sanctuary area, even if you have very difficult circumstances outside. Now you can create an area that's been more cleaned of particles inside the home without having to worry about changing out the entire HVAC system for a one-time event. So that's a good thing. And again, the portable that you select ought to have a high CADR, a high clean air delivery rate for fine particles, for smoke. This slide shows you a class of equipment that is becoming very popular throughout the United States. It's always been popular in Europe and even more popular in Asia. The unit that you see high on the wall above that abstract painting is the indoor unit of a ductless mini split. That's the term of art, a mini split system. It doesn't have any air ducts. It sits on the wall and it circulates air into the cooling and heating unit there, the rectangular white box, and then it rejects heat or absorbs heat from the outside in an outside unit that is connected with refrigerant tubes. So this inside unit is wonderful and it provides really good air mixing. A big advantage of this type of equipment is that it's available not in huge, ginormous amounts like some air conditioning systems are, but in more modest size. So this is great for buildings that are modern and airtight and have very low heating and cooling loads. So you see this type of equipment all over the place, especially for retrofits in existing buildings, and also for buildings that have very low loads because you can get small ones, unlike the HVAC systems, which tend to be far bigger. So this is terrific. That's the good news. The bad news, however, is that these really aren't equipped with anything other than those roughing filters. the roughing filters, such as what we saw, the sort of green level filter, or maybe something a little bit better than that in that original slide. And that is a filter that's designed to protect the equipment and to keep the dust and the crud off of the surfaces in the air handler itself. What you're looking at there is the air handler. You don't want stuff and particles gumming up the works in there, so there's a filter, but it really isn't going to take much of anything out in the way of fine particles. So that's a limitation of this type of equipment. But again, if you have this type of equipment, and if you're in a wildfire zone or if you're in an urban area and you want better filtration for whatever reason, then you can invest in a portable, and that will do a very creditable job. The question is, where do you put the filter if you're only going to have one? And the answer is, if you're only going to have one, put it in the baby's bedroom. And the reason that you want to do that is because babies, infants, and young kids are more susceptible to the problems that happen with fine particles for a couple of reasons. One is that their immune systems are not necessarily as well developed as those of adolescents and adults. And the other reason is that small kids have a larger lung capacity compared to their body mass than do older people. When you're young, you have quite a bit of lung surface, and that provides a lot of transfer service for those nasty small particles that we don't want to be transiting your lungs, compared to the body mass of the rest of the body that provides the resources with which to deal with the contaminants that come in small particles. So you'd like to put the filter where it will do the most good. That would be in a room where infants spend time sleeping or playing. And that's a great place for that. What I've put here, what we decided to put on this is a picture of actually one of my granddaughters. This was taken a few years ago, and we put a filter with a very high CADR in that bedroom to protect her, because she and her sister live in an urban area with a great deal of traffic near their apartment. So this has been doing a terrific job at protecting the kiddos, and that's what you want to do. So if you have money to invest, and if you can only invest in one, then a bedroom is a terrific place to put that filter. So I'm going to summarize here in a second, but a little bit of an ad for the fact that we've given you a pretty brief summary of what we know and what the EPA has decided to publish about guidance for air cleaners in the home from a consumer perspective. But as you can appreciate, when the EPA does anything, they look at it in great detail. And the great detail is itself summarized in a 74-page document of a technical summary. And that will be the subject of a second webinar that we invite you to attend, and that will be held on Thursday, March 21st. Again, another Thursday at the same time, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you want to dig into some more of the details of what we know and what we still need to learn about air cleaners in the home, what's easy to say now and what's more difficult to say and why, then we invite you to attend that next webinar where Terry and I will talk about the technical summary in more detail. So to summarize this seminar, and now what we want to do is we'd like to direct you to your web interface there so that you can type in your questions, which we would very much like to hear. So go ahead and type them in as I summarize this. So the quick summary for consumers is that small particles are the guys that we care most about from a health risk perspective. They do represent the most significant health risk that we're aware of, and that we have good epidemiology, good health studies to support. Small particles, we don't want them. The best and the lowest cost solution to dealing with small particles is to remove these at the source. From an indoor source, certainly if you can avoid burning things, that's already a great idea. But then if things need to be burned, as things get burned on the stove and the toast is going to burn and so forth, you can, if you have one, you can run a kitchen exhaust fan. The reason that we put bath exhaust fan in this same category is, yes, there are small particles that are generated there. It's not a big source of small particles of concern from a particle point of view, but it is a big source of concern from the point of view of excessive humidity. So two things, sometimes excessive humidity in a bathroom can be a problem because it can accumulate and then it can lead to microbial growth such as mold and bacteria, and we don't want those in the house either. So if you can keep the excessive humidity out by venting at the kitchen and venting in the bathroom, then that's all to the good. Finally, to summarize, from an HVAC system perspective, what you'd like to look for is a MERV 13 or higher for furnaces or air conditioning systems, or if a portable is your choice, or if you'd like to add a portable, then what you want to look for is a high CADR, a high clean air delivery rate, especially a high clean air delivery rate of air that has been cleaned of smoke particles. That's going to be your best bet. One last item about portables is that those ratings that we discussed are for units that are probably running at their highest speed. So if you want to run them at a lower speed for a quieter filter, then get a larger size unit than you might otherwise choose for a room, and then you can get a great clean air delivery rate at a lower fan speed, and that might be congenial for those who might be disturbed sleeping if there's loud noise. Some people, on the other hand, like to have noise at night to cover, let's say, the snores of their partner. So perhaps the white noise is a benefit, but for those of you that are going to use portables and white noise is not a benefit, then maybe a larger rather than a smaller portable unit would be a good choice. Okay. So that completes the discussion, the discussion material that we have prepared for you. And now we'd like to hear from you about what you would like to hear about. And I'll begin here now and ask, let's see, our support staff here, whether we have any questions at this point.
Thank you, Lew, Terry, for a great presentation. We have a lot of questions here prepared for you. First one. Do you have data on the average particle size and of particles exhausting from a standard home's vacuum cleaners?
Here's a good question. Terry, you want to handle that one?
Yeah, sure, Lew. We have lots of data from vacuum studies. The answer is that it varies quite a lot. Some emit very few particles, because they have good filtration, and often they have double filtration both before the fan motor and after the fan motor when they have very low emissions. For ordinary vacuum cleaners, a lot of times now you can get a filter that isn't a HEPA filter but is designed to get things that are in the 2.5 and less range. And so you can find those, and they'll do a good job or a poor job depending on how well the filter seals.
If I could add something to that, Terry, a couple things. We mentioned, and I've used the acronym too, HEPA, H-E-P-A, that's high efficiency particulate arrestants. And that is, if you have a vacuum cleaner that has a HEPA, H-E-P-A filter in it, chances are good that you're going to have a lot fewer of the smaller particles come at you out of the vacuum cleaner than if you don't have one of those. The other thing is that, generally speaking, and Terry, please correct me if I'm exaggerating this, but I think in general, the bagless vacuum cleaners are likely to emit more particles and a wider distribution of particles than the bag type filters in general. And that's especially true when you go to empty the reservoir that's collecting the dust, because then you get all kinds of stuff coming at you out of there. But am I exaggerating that issue, Terry?
Well, when you're emptying the bag, that definitely is the case for both for bag and for bagless. That's a time when you can get some pretty big exposures. In terms of a bagless, how much that would emit, a lot depends on a secondary filter. So many of those have a secondary filter, so they have the cyclone, that's the primary filter, and then they have often a pleated, or sometimes it's not a pleated, it's just a foam filter that doesn't really help that much with the fine fraction.
Thank you.
Next question. Yep.
All right, next question. Consumer-grade HEPA filters and air cleaners typically say they will last up to 1 year under normal use. However, during severe wildfire smoke episodes, I have noticed significant soot buildup behind HEPA filters, which suggests the air is finding ways around the filter as the filter becomes saturated. What guidance should we give the public about replacing HEPA filters during wildfire smoke events? Similarly, how frequently would a MERV 13 or higher filter need to be replaced during a prolonged smoke event?
Great question. Why don't we both take a crack at that? You want to try that one first, Terry?
All I can say is that I actually don't know how much data there is. I haven't seen any real good studies on that. So in general, it depends on how big the source is, and you have a big source during wildfires, so beats the heck out of me.
Same here. On the other hand, I can think of a couple things to think about in a wildfire situation with HEPA filters. The first is that the questioner mentioned that he or she found soot building up downstream of the filter, in other words, after the filter. So kind of thinking that maybe they're bypassing the filter or going through the filter. Maybe going through the filter, chances are better that they're going around the filter. And that brings up an extremely important point. When you're talking about HEPA filters, especially where you're wanting to get really lots and lots, high percentage of the fine particles out, that filter has got to be really snug in the frame. And unfortunately, many of the consumer-grade filters don't have tight air gaskets around the HEPA filter. So if they don't, and if you're seeing soot build up behind the filter, in other words, downstream of the filter, after the filter, then maybe you could reach in and put some blue tape or something like that around on the inside so that the air can't bypass around the edges, the four edges of the filter. That's number one. Number two is that, and this is something that Terry, you mentioned to me when I was asking you about my own filter and my energy recovery ventilator in my house, is you pointed out that just because the filter looks a little grungy doesn't necessarily mean it's not still doing a great job. And so that's something that might not need to be replaced unless you're just not getting a whole heck of a lot of air through the filter anymore. So there's two things to think about. May not have to replace it an awful lot, but am I getting that right, Terry, or is there other stuff to think about there?
Yeah, that may be the case. It would do it. I mean, if you could measure the pressure drop, that might tell the story for that. But soot stains very quickly, and turns things dark, so you can see where it's deposited, but most other fine particles don't really stain that much.
Okay, I think we're ready for the next question.
All right, thank you. Let's see. How does the filtret rating level compare to the MERV rating?
Sure. Well, the filtret rating system is one that's produced by one company, by the 3M company, and they, I believe, use the MPR rating, unless I'm wrong about that, Terry. So that's the MPR rating that we were discussing in that rating slide. And again, if you have an MPR rating in the 9 or 10 rating, those are the top two of that scale. That's going to be a MERV 13 or better.
The one thing that I'd like to add, Lew, is with an ordinary fibrous filter, the more it loads up, the finer the particles it collects. So its filtration of finer particles gets improved, but the airflow through the filter starts to drop off, so you're filtering less air. With a filtrete kind of a filter that's got a sort of a static electric charge induced on the plastic material in the filter, they get additional benefit from the electrostatic charge, so they collect any particle that's got a charge on it. And that helps them to collect more of the finer particles. But if the electret starts losing its static charge as it collects charged particles, then it becomes less effective at collecting those. So it's kind of a little opposite effect, which is I think that's part of the reason why the manufacturers ended up with their own standard as opposed to the ASHRAE standard for measuring effectiveness. Is they couldn't agree on how to handle that dynamic.
Good little the inside dirty secrets of filtration rating. Yeah.
All right, next question. HVAC professionals object that high MERV filters burn out fan motors and increase energy consumption. Are there resources about adapting filter housings in existing furnaces to avoid causing pressure drop?
Again, I think we'll both want to take a crack at this. This is something that we spent, the consulting group that was helping EPA spent a great deal of time talking about developing the consumer guidance, because the last thing we wanted to do is make a recommendation that would cause someone to have difficulty with their HVAC system. At MERV 13, even 1-inch filters, which have a higher pressure drop, they're not really there's very little risk in that, especially if it's a relatively clean filter. When you get up towards, MERV 14, 15, and 16, towards the HEPA class in residential, two things happen. One is that you're going to have to go for a deeper filter. There won't be any 1-inch filters that are going to do that job. It's going to be probably a 4-inch filter, or maybe even deeper, to get those higher ratings. And that probably, if the system is adapted for it, if the filter rack that was in there to begin with is torn out and you put in a deeper filter rack that can handle that, chances are the pressure drop isn't going to change. It'll be a similar pressure drop. The problem definitely comes where you are adding a MERV 13 filter to a system like some of the lower cost recirculating wall type furnaces, things like that, where it's not a big central system with a great deal of system fan. And if you're putting a wall furnace, you're adding a deeper filter to that, or a denser filter, and especially if it's never changed, that can cause problems. But to answer the question directly, there is no easy place to go to get simple advice on every HVAC system in residences, because there are just too darn many different types. But the recommendation about MERV 13 in California went this way too, is it's relatively benign as long as the filter is changed on a reasonably regular basis, not likely to have problems with pressure drop. It's not to say that there haven't been problems, but it's not likely to be a general problem. So, but Terry, you probably have more perspective on that too.
Well, what's coming to mind for me, Lew, is that the pressure drop issue is one of the reasons that electric filters were developed in a 1-inch slot with you get an enhanced filtration of fine particles with a filter that has a pretty low pressure drop, or a pretty small pressure drop across it, because it's got a static charge working for it, the passive static charge. And the second piece of that is, as I've looked at filter details and specifications from where you'd typically go to buy a filter for a residential unit, probably 80-90% of them do have one form of an electret fiber built into it or another form. So they're not all made by the same manufacturer. They're not all the Filtrete, but it's actually relatively not that easy to find a residential filter that isn't taking advantage of that. So the pressure drop is not so high across them. But MERV 13 is about where you see a crossover, where you're still seeing quite a few of the electret type filters, but you're also seeing deeper ordinary media filters to get to that MERV 13, and higher.
Thank you. Next question. Can a portable air cleaner that is rated to clean a large space, for example, 1,100 square feet, move air in and out of bedrooms if it's placed in the living room? Would you advise folks to purchase additional smaller portable air cleaners for bedrooms as well?
Well, I suppose that depends on how much money is involved and how much money is available. Certainly that would be the advice that anyone would give is, more filtration is better. To answer the first part of the question directly, you're not likely to make an enormous difference in the particle concentration in a bedroom if the filtration unit is somewhere else. That's relying on drifting clean air, and that's not a very reliable transport mechanism. I just don't think that would be very effective. But it would depend, of course, entirely on the configuration of the building. I suppose it's possible. But yeah, if the filter's in the living room because someone needs to spend a lot of time there, then probably a good place for it. But certainly, if it were me, I'd put the money into the bedroom because that's where the people spend the largest number of hours. Terry?
I agree, Lou. To get the filtration in the bedroom, you need to have a unit there in the bedroom.
All right, gentlemen. Well, it looks like we've come up to the top of the hour, and it's at the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for everything. We've received a lot of great questions. To everyone listening in the audience, we will be passing on the list to our speakers, and please join us again for our next webinar where you can pose your questions and share them for discussion. Laureen, do you have anything else to add?
Thank you, Terry and Lou. As always, we really appreciate you helping us out on these webinars. We will put together some of the questions, and maybe there's some of them that can be addressed at our next webinar on March 21st, or there may be some that we can address when we put them up on our website. So thank you all for participating, and thank you, Terry and Lou.